right. Well, we are here today with Alex Frommeyer. I think most people know you as Fro. Alex, I'm excited to connect with you today. You're one of the shining bright lights in the city and have just a really kind of fun and smiley, energetic way of being around town. And I've been able to connect with you in the past, but observe that really mostly more than anything. And so I'm excited to have you here and to dig in and to hear your journey.
It's great to be on, man. I'm actually rewatching Entourage right now. Introduced it to my fiance, who I didn't think would like it, by the way, but she does. And Vincent Chase, the movie star, says at one point, "My life is too good to be worried about shit like this." And that explains my personality. Is like life is good, and it's short too, so it might as well be having as much fun as possible.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Yeah, Entourage is a fun show.
It is.
My son actually just went through and watched the whole thing. He's 19 and in college, and I wondered if it would still translate. And it holds up. It's still good today.
Yes. Though notably, you could never launch it as a new series today. The level of sexism in particular in the show would be just a non-starter.
No.
So that part didn't age well, but probably everything else did.
Yeah, it's of a time period, that's for sure. So anyway, let's hop in. I'd love to kind of start at the beginning. Our format really has been to try to hear the full story. So tell me a little bit about kind of your early days, your family, your childhood, where you're from, kind of set the stage for us.
I'm from Kentucky. Grew up in Campbell County, which is one of the three counties that butt up against the Ohio River and Cincinnati. So I'm from the very, very northern tip of Kentucky, which is shaped more or less like a triangle. And that tippity top point of the triangle just comes right up to Cincinnati, Ohio. So I grew up in the greater Cincinnati area. And I grew up in actually kind of a unique geography, which is essentially that even though my dad was close enough to downtown Cincinnati that he commuted to downtown, which took about a half an hour every single day for our family growing up, when you're at my house, you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. We lived on top of a big hill. My driveway is almost a mile long, I think. And it's like straight up the side of this hill. And it's on about 100-ish acres of mostly woods. So it's very isolated. It feels like you're 100 miles away from any city, and really you're only about 15 miles outside of a pretty major city. And so it was this really interesting juxtaposition, which I loved and hated growing up. So I was, as a kid, really interested in being outside all the time, juxtaposed by loving reading. So I was either inside reading or outside playing in the woods pretty much every day. But at the time, even though I loved both of those activities, I absolutely hated where I lived because we had to get in the car and drive to any of my friends' houses. We were far enough away that it was always a car ride away. And really was jealous of my friends growing up in a subdivision where they could all just get together, 2 houses away, 10 houses away, whatever it was in the subdivision, play baseball or football or whatever the thing was that day. And so I was constantly jealous of my friends who lived in close proximity to one another when I was so isolated in my view. But it cultivated a sense of curiosity because I had to create my own imaginary friends and then my own, playtime storylines out in the woods. And all the reading I did as a child, I think really just cultivated a lot of imagination and creativity that I carry through today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've actually heard this story similar from others that have kind of grown up, not so much the kind of like wanting to be with the friends, but the part about the imagination. It does seem like when kind of forced to be creative, maybe we can tap into a side of us that otherwise doesn't come out. And I'm kind of curious from your standpoint, hindsight's 2020. I don't know if you kind of are looking at it from that perspective or if you, felt like this at the time, but did you think that you were just naturally creative? Or do you feel like that was really a product of your environment that was, brought out of you because of?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think I would have never described myself as creative, mostly because I would have heavily associated that word with being artistic, and I would have associated art with visual art, which I would have associated with painting only.
Yeah.
So
Very
even though
common.
I've been a musician,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
And so I've been a musician since I've been playing drums since I was 11 or 12 years old. And so that became a heavy creative outlet for me. But again, as a kid, I wouldn't have even have called the drums creative. I would have thought of that as like, well, I'm not very good at drawing and I'm not very good at painting at all, so I must not be creative. And only later does it make a ton of sense that the curiosity, the imagination, the creativity is a muscle that gets flexed in so many different ways in life and in the professional world that, now I consider myself actually, that's a superpower, is flexing back and forth between being analytical and an engineer by training and then thinking creatively about problems and solutions. At the time, I wouldn't have given it a second thought.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm wondering a little bit about kind of your family and, how that influenced you at that time. I think it's like amazing right away. This is exactly why I enjoy having these conversations, and what I, hope that the listeners will hear is you've already connected some pretty powerful dots, right? You had this thing where you were in these kind of two worlds. You had to bounce back and forth. You had to use your imagination, and so now how that gets applied to today. I mean, to me, my belief is that all of these little fragments of our life are there for us to learn and grow and use, which is exactly what you're doing now. But I'm wondering again, like how much of that was just kind of, what happened, how much of that was maybe intentional, or where your parents and kind of family values or upbringing, influenced that part of your life.
Yeah, I love it because now it all seems so obvious in retrospect, right? But you can, at multiple points in my childhood and growing up, there's always been these opposing forces, these tensions in my interests or in my situation that now in retrospect looks so obvious as to inform my personality or the things I then got into professionally, led me toward Beam, led me toward my co-founders, led me toward the key relationships in my life. But most of them were accidents, happy accidents, or purposeful coming from me, not necessarily the people around me, especially my parents. Because my parents, I grew up in a 2-parent household. They've been married for mid-30s of years already. Met in high school, started dating in college, kind of been together forever type of storyline. Both come from big families, big Catholic families in the Cincinnati region. And so I grew up in a household that was heavily indexed toward stability, predictability, and engagement. My mom was working back and forth between part-time at a hospital. She's an occupational therapist by training, so she'd do a couple days a week there, but mostly at home with my 2 sisters and I. And then my dad, engineer, mathematician, worked in IT for a variety of Fortune 500 style businesses, so big stable companies. And so everything was built with the family first, the family in mind. So it was a really great, really loving household, but not in a very not driven by here's the playbook and here's how we're going to execute. We're going to get you into this school. You're going to study this. You're going to care about that. So not prescriptive at all. In fact, the exact opposite. My parents politically are probably very libertarian in nature. So everything is like I'm here to guide, but the moment you turn 18 in particular, but even leading up to that, it's kind of like you make your own mistakes, you get your hands dirty or you don't, and you kind of do whatever you want to do. You want to play football? Let's play football. You want to quit football? Quit football. Who cares? So it's up to you, but consequences are all on you. And so I think I, now appreciate an environment that was kind of maximalist on freedom, with some interesting caveats being around anything that was kind of like a no morally. So my parents weren't like, yes, you can drink because
Mm-hmm.
freedom, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
still, there were things that were off limits for sure. But anything that I wanted to do, activities, after school things, hobbies, I wanted to play the drums. So I got a drum set, right? And my parents weren't nudging me toward the piano. They weren't nudging me toward this sport, that sport, these things, those things. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a household where the idea of me going to college was a foregone conclusion the day I was born. Something I now appreciate a lot that I think is less true than I thought it was growing up. I thought everybody grew up assumed that college was an absolute foregone conclusion, and it's not. But that freedom that I was lucky to grow up with allowed me to explore lots of different things. And so I ended up being a big sports guy, but took pit stops in gymnastics, taekwondo. I dabbled with a couple other instruments before finding my home in drums. And that was really great. The flexibility to kind of meander my way through childhood, trying different things, shows up later in my interest in everything when I was in engineering school and dropping into classes at the University of Louisville that I had nothing to do with my major, but I was just interested in learning more.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing to highlight, this approach your parents took. It sounds really healthy to me, in kind of the research I've done and kind of, the world of psychology and therapy and, parental, guidelines. And, there is a pretty strong through line that people tend to elevate, which is that letting your kids go on their own journey and being more of a guide and a support system is the kind of preferred method. That wasn't as much, my experience. I think even with my own kids, you do have what you think is their best interest in mind. You think that you might know what's actually best for them.
Yeah.
I have kind of learned as a parent that I'm not as convinced of that as I once was. That in fact, the world's changing. Even things like college, that was kind of the way I grew up too. That was like a given, and it's really a given for my kids too. Except that I'm more open to it not necessarily being as important as I thought it was. In any event, we could talk about that, but I guess I'm impressed, and I'm just curious, like if you felt that freedom in a way that really did shape you, that they weren't pushing things on you, that they weren't, even sometimes it's subtle, even sometimes it's super loving. But it's the fact that you had that freedom, and yet there were boundaries too. So too much freedom can be a problem. You were a kid, so I just I don't know if you want to say anything more about kind of the felt experience of having that kind of parental environment.
Yeah, I'll touch on it because there are soft pressures that exist. Your kids probably go through this, which is the follow in the footsteps situation where you're a successful person, and there's and you've built a community around you, and your kids probably feel some level of soft pressure to go into that world. Like, does LeBron James' kids have, does Bronny have a choice in the matter to play basketball or not? There's a lot of pressure there to do what dad does, right? And or mom, or just a key influence in your life. And I didn't really have that. So there was no soft pressure to, follow dad into engineering or follow mom into the healthcare field, even though that kind of happened. I sit at kind of the nexus of healthcare and technology today. But there was never soft pressure there. What's interesting is that I would say that my felt experience would have been about all the things I wasn't getting. Mom, I want to go to my friend's house. Can I have a ride? Nope. I didn't have cable growing up is another good example of this. So, all my friends had cable. We just had, the basic 5 channels or whatever. And so that imagination and curiosity and the cultivation of that was partially likely driven by the fact that I could only watch MTV or Nickelodeon or anything else I wanted to do when I was at somebody else's house. I couldn't do it at my own house. And there were, I think, things that to me felt like draconian, backwards. We weren't spoiled kids, so we got presents for Christmas, but I didn't get like the cool shoes that I wanted every time. I didn't get the new baseball mitt that all my friends got. So I always felt one step behind on the consumables or the material items. But in exchange for that, now I deeply appreciate that what my parents were indexing for is, instead of, giving me exactly what I wanted and giving my sisters exactly what we wanted, they were giving us a platform to just kind of find our way through to the thing. And so even though I wouldn't consider my parents heavy creatives by any stretch themselves, it turns out that at least with me, I ended up being high on imagination and interest in creating an odd set of circumstances for myself to get myself into arenas that wouldn't have been typical or expected of somebody growing up in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know just from reading a little bit about you as well that you've been you've been very conscious of how you've chosen to live, including things like not having a car and not having traditional furniture in your home. I wonder just how much of that kind of connects back to that experience where your parents, did kind of impart on you having appreciation and value in things that you maybe are more important, or that you don't necessarily have to have the things that everybody has. How much of that has kind of come through as an adult?
As a kid, learning the lessons around not having or not allowing yourself to have all the material goods, I think was a great lesson. Really great on, I learned, save your money. That was a great lesson early on, is here's your allowance, but here's how you save it. Here's how you balance the checkbook. I was balancing a checkbook at 5 years old, and I was getting a quarter a week in an allowance or something. And so that savings culture, that make sure your money goes toward the thing you really, really want. And that's probably means delayed gratification, because the thing you think you want right now might change in a week or a month or a year. So save your money and make sure you really want it before you go all in. That was taught early on. And then later in life, let's say college or maybe just post-grad, I learned the second big lesson along the lines that I think informs a lot of my lifestyle decisions subsequently, which is critical thinking. Everybody else has a couch in their house. I hate couches. I hate them. That's a very intentional decision. Doesn't mean I won't have a couch one day in the house, but as of this moment, the result of a critical thinking exercise around how do I want to live and how do I want my guests to interact when we have guests at our apartment, yielded a couch is not the answer. It's the exact opposite of the answer. So we don't have traditional furniture in the house. And I haven't owned a car in 3 or 4 years. Purposely placed myself at the center of downtown and right at Broad and High, like the geographic center of the city of Columbus. So I can get to every bus line. I can bike pretty much anywhere. I can get anywhere fast. And then not need a car to execute my groceries, my professional life, my entertainment. It all happens within a pretty small radius, and that's all intentional. And critical thinking is what got me there. And I try to apply it in little ways and then like huge ways as well, which is like, how do I spend my time every day as well?
Yeah. Okay. I want to come back to that because I have a lot of questions around kind of just the way you're thinking about things and the intentionality and kind of how you choose to apply that and where. But I do want to kind of take the rest of the way through this kind of childhood part. So tell me, as you get into high school and you're a young adult, you mentioned sports, the drums, reading, tell me about what starts to kind of show up for you as you start to think about eventually you go to engineering school. Where are you in that kind of in-between period?
In high school, this is where I think a lot of the tensions or these dualities start showing up in life. So one of them is I loved math and science, but I was weaker in math and science versus reading and writing. So all my test scores would have told you that I should be something that heavily indexes on reading and writing, but all my interests, the subjects I loved the most and I cared the most about, it was all math and science. And so that was a weird tension for me. What you're best at is usually what you like doing. And this was a little bit imbalanced for me. I was a successful student in general, but I loved calculus. Didn't really like English, but way outperformed my peers in English. And I was middle of the pack in calculus. Sports were another great example. I pushed really hard to not just make our baseball team, not just become a starter, but I became a left-handed catcher. If you know anything about baseball, you know how rare a left-handed catcher is. They have to get a custom catcher's mitt made because they don't make left-handed catcher's mitts because there are so few of them. And it was now obviously a challenge to myself, which is, can you succeed at the highest level? Can you make your varsity baseball team for a really good program in Kentucky, but do it doing something that is just objectively weird and left of center and, 30 degrees orthogonal to how anybody else would do this? Because every other lefty is getting a job on first base as a pitcher or an outfielder. It's just what's happening. And I also played football as well. And again, couldn't just settle for what my body type would have probably suggested, which is wide receiver, cornerback, safety. I said, no, I want to be a linebacker. I'm 150 pounds in high school. I barely deserved to be on the field at all at that size, but I needed to become a varsity starter as an outside linebacker and compete with people that have 50 pounds on me day in and day out to prove that I couldn't just do it, but I could do it with another constraint or another condition or another odd component to the story. And those tensions are now, I think, really instructive to still how I think about building businesses, building products, and then doing things in my personal life, which is how can I take some disparate couple of interests or this thing happening over here and this market happening over here and smash them together and just see what comes out, because I've seen it work in these weird ways dating back to high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I think it really is a superpower to be able to kind of see how things can come together that don't appear to really make sense for most people. I mean, that is really a sweet spot that, as a visionary, as a innovator, as a creative, being able to connect those dots and then not just connect the dots, but then, execute, so, there's a lot of people and there's been a lot of conversation about this that, will say, well, at 150 pounds, you just don't play linebacker, right? Like, and you're certainly never going to have any success at it. And to not let that kind of common language stop you and then to be successful at it, is a very different story. And I'm wondering, if you could just kind of double click on that a little bit, like, where does that come from? Where does I'm going to do it anyway? I don't care what the statistics, the history, the public says. I'm doing this anyway. Where does that come from?
I actually have no idea. It's a really good point that it was never just about being, let's say, weird for weird's sake. You probably know people like this. I know I do, which is, they love being different, but different doesn't necessarily mean and then excel at that difference. It's really about different for different's sake, at least in some ways. And I always viewed those left of center approaches as an opportunity, I think, to put a chip on my shoulder if it didn't already exist, because I'm maybe naturally very competitive or was just interested in disparate outcomes. Maybe I understood like asymmetry as a kid kind of naturally, which is, I wonder if I just do this differently, if it ends up working better than everyone expects. If I'm too small to be a linebacker traditionally, but I'm quicker than the average offensive lineman, does that actually open up more value for my team as a result? I don't know. Let's try. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe those kind of forced chips on shoulders have kept my intention or my engagement, because it wasn't just about doing it in general the way my teammates were doing it, but I wanted to do it and get there in a different way. And that was always made it that much more interesting to me to see it through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe jumping ahead a little bit, and we'll circle back around as you move into college. But I am curious, this forced chip on the shoulder, I think there's a lot of people that would say that there was something motivating them beyond just a goal to be successful, whether that be, in sports or in business or in life in any way. Sometimes there are doubters, there are haters, there are people that, put a chip on your shoulder. And I'm wondering, how much of your success today do you really think comes from having a chip on your shoulder? Or did you let go of that earlier and is something else driving you? Is it a combination of, and there's, no judgment here. I'm just, curious, like where does that play a role in your life now?
Yeah, it's a combination for sure, because many of the bogeys that we've created at Beam, for example, and this is especially with my co-founders over the course of the 8+ years now, are pretty imaginary. Here's what the big incumbent insurance companies we're competing against are definitely thinking about or working on in the background. And it was like totally made up. It was a way to motivate ourselves that our competitors were right on our heels in the early days. We have invented a lot of, common enemies that, again, I think just focus and align our attention and our intentions as a business that have always been really helpful. They've worked for me. I've seen them work for a lot of other people too. And then sometimes there probably are real haters and meaningful adversity that comes in externally that has been, of course, easy to rally around and motivate me to overcome, or motivate our teams to overcome. But it's definitely been not just that. I wouldn't say that we've been successful because there's adversity or a common enemy or some sort of Lyft to our Uber or Coke to our Pepsi that we've just had to defeat, and it's driven us to get to this point and beyond. So the other side of motivation for me has increasingly over time been about using the limited precious time that I and we all have on planet Earth to just maximize impact. And I've found that is just a phenomenal motivator, because you can strip away all the other stuff that happens along the way. It's really fun to meet people. I love building teams. I'm doing some hiring right now, and it is so much fun to meet smart people and imagine how they might fit into the business. But that even the people interactions goes away over time, because you become desensitized to all these awesome people around you all the time. It's an embarrassment of riches. And then there's money, earthly stuff. And you're like, man, this is cool too. But then even that falls away after a while. What I'm left with is a deep sense of motivation to fulfill the mission of our business around healthcare equity, around transforming an entire industry. And I know the next thing, whether it's a continuation of an expansion of Beam's mission or a new company, will be directly focused on some sort of maximization of impact, solving a problem for planet Earth. There's no better way to use your time on the planet, in my view.
Yeah, well, you're preaching to the choir. I get really encouraged and energized to hear you say that, because I totally subscribe to the impact being the fueling factor, right? And the chips and the money and the motivators and whatever else is out there. Again, no judgment. I've had it. I've been through all of that. It's fueled me. It got me here. But today, the impact is really what fuels me too. I heard Elon Musk recently talk about this subject where he said something like profit should be a direct correlation to value. What are you providing to people? What is the value you are creating? If you are creating value, and to me that means impact. You're making people's lives better. You're making communities better. You're making the world a better place. Then the money will follow. It doesn't have to, but it can. And so I love to hear that that's, really what's driving you, more than anything. And kind of coming back to, as you start to go into the engineering world, right? I'm really fascinated because I know enough about you today, but I'm fascinated at that point. You're going into college, into engineering. You're really this multifaceted person, the kind of like high level athletics, right? There's this kind of imagination, creativity, and the other pieces that came from where you lived and your family. But you go into engineering, which also historically wasn't kind of reserved for people that were up to making the kind of impact that you aspire to. And maybe that's unfair, but I always kind of thought it as a little bit more as a blocking and tackling kind of in it analytical. Obviously today the engineering world with technology has blown wide open, but at that time, tell me a little bit about what you were thinking then.
I think it's exactly that point that drove my co-founders and I together at Beam, which was, you're exactly right. And I would say even today, technology is still reserved for mostly the computer science and computer engineering departments of engineering schools, and then that group inside of even those schools. So it's a limited number of schools, limited number of people. Your meat and potatoes engineering program is a mechanical engineering program at an Ohio State or in Illinois or a Michigan State or something, right? And so these are these big engineering programs that are mostly indexed on feeding individual contributor engineers into large manufacturing businesses, chemical plants, oil refineries, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the culture of University of Louisville, where my co-founders and I all went to school as well. And inside that program was, in order to graduate, even with a bachelor's degree, you had to have 3 semesters of a co-op or an internship. It was baked into the program. And the whole point of this program was to give you real world experience and as a feeder system into trying out maybe multiple different employers or staying with one through all 3 co-ops. But the idea is you would graduate and basically next Monday you'd start working at probably wherever you co-opt. And it was a wonderful program, but my co-founders and I, Dan Dykes and Alex Frommeyer and I, we all came back from our first semester away at the various co-ops that we were working at, and all concluded the exact same thing, which is, oh my God, is this it? And if that is it, we need to come up with a new plan here. We need to figure out how to avoid getting these big boy jobs ASAP. And I think what we were seeing or experiencing was that the type of work that you did, which is very mechanical, repeatable work for companies that were mostly playing not to lose, right? So one, Dan Dykes, he worked at an oil refinery for his co-ops. It's all about safety and compliance and make sure the thing doesn't blow up, right? Size the pipes correctly so that the whole thing, the system stays in balance. And it's important work, obviously, but it just wasn't of interest to a personality like his, nor mine, nor Alex Curry's. And so what brought us together, we were already friends and we had a bunch of classes together and some shared mutual friends and experiences. So we were already friends, but what really brought us together and made us want to start a business together was that our collective mindset, and certainly mine, I was the driver behind getting serious about building a business while we're supposed to be, taking 18 hours a semester of engineering coursework, was, man, there is so much more out there we can do and there's so much more that I desire to do with my time than what it appears a professional engineer actually does. And so that probably spoke back to the fact that at the time I was interested in everything, and engineering was just my most acute interest, but that list was long. And I figured that the only way I was ever going to get a chance to explore the next 99 interests on my list was going to be owning my own company where I had that freedom and flexibility versus working for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. These are like, the big names, but Jeff Bezos, I heard it recently say that actually it was a C-level coworker who just retired and was at this conference I was at, who said that he's known Jeff since college, and his mission was always to go to space, and selling books online was just a way to do that, right? And so, there is this kind of like, well, I want to be my own creator of my own life, and so business is going to be the way that I do that. And I find it fascinating that you started off with friends from college, and here you are today with this business. I mean, did you go straight into Beam from that program with your co-founders? Was that the path?
Not quite, but it is with my same co-founders. So we've been together pretty much every day, starting with classes and then with our first business and then Beam since 2006. So we've been together a long time. But we didn't start Beam immediately because we didn't have the idea for Beam, or frankly, we didn't have any ideas at all. So one of the things that we got wrong, if you listen to the traditional advice about starting a business, is that there was no particular scratch that we were itching by starting a company. And we had no product or service that was unique and differentiated or solved a very specific problem. The only specific problem we had at the time is that, oh my God, I don't want to get a job as a professional engineer. That was the problem we were solving. So the whole business was a ploy, a very elaborate ploy to avoid taking a salaried position as an entry-level engineer at wherever. That first business, which we started, I think when we were juniors in school, and then lasted until just after we graduated, which is when Beam, we then rotated into Beam essentially. For about 2 or 2.5 years, we were running a engineering services business, which I defined broadly as anybody who asked us to do work and had money, we said yes to. That was essentially our business model. And so we were doing everything and running the whole thing out of my living room. And Alex Curry was living with me at the time. So two of the three of us were living together, running the thing out of our living room for 2 years while convincing our parents that whatever we were doing was like not really that important. And, it was a very minimal thing we were doing on the side for fun, but it was really like at least 50 or 60 hours a week. And then we were scurrying around trying to make it look like we were still getting our coursework done so nobody noticed. And that business was fascinating. We learned so much. It all looks so smart and intentional now when we subsequently ended up starting an insurance business. But what that work was at the time was a bunch of disparate clients, mostly in Louisville, Kentucky. And my job in the business was to go out, meet a bunch of people, build a network in the business community, and convince people that 3 random engineers at the undergrads at the engineering school could do whatever it is that they wanted. Custom electronics, CAD modeling, technical writing, patent and intellectual property drafting. We did work with silicone manufacturing parts. We did R&D stuff. We built websites. We did early IoT applications. We were interested in everything, and so we just gobbled the work up and built a little reputation for ourselves in the city that there were kind of 3 whiz kids, and some of their friends in engineering school were like building this like little business out of just odds and ends work. Sometimes for established important companies in town, and other times just for a one-off inventor, somebody that had an idea that they were trying to turn into kind of go 0 to 1 on an idea. And it was fascinating work, and we did it with a ton of joy and effort and gusto for 2.5 years.
Yeah, it's great. I think a lot of times people who are maybe new or don't have kind of the direct contact to what it means to be an entrepreneur will probably look at the headlines that say Beam raises X amount of money and has X amount of people and doing X, Y, and Z, right? And what they don't know fully, even if they kind of understand it, unless they've experienced it, they don't fully really know what it's like to have the first gig, right? To use your whole life experience to create and to actually go through all the scary as hell times before that headline comes. And I'm just kind of enjoying, and for those that are listening and can't see, the smile as you talk about those fun kind of, even if they weren't necessarily at the time you say joy, but I mean, there might have been moments where you're like, I don't know what the hell we're doing here.
Might have
right?
been. Yeah. Might have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so, that to me is like, that's the journey. That's the good stuff. And like, if you're in that stage where you don't know how you're going to get, I mean, even the fact that you kind of nonchalantly say we didn't have any ideas, but you figured out a business. You did. You were figuring out a business. It was working, especially for college kids, right? It might not be a VC-backed unicorn, but like for some people, if that business was their full-time gig for the rest of their lives, they would have been happy and successful.
Yeah, and it would have worked. Yeah,
and it would have worked.
Yeah. But if we would have kept at it, it would have worked. Absolutely, at scale.
Yeah. And you decided that there was something else there too. So tell me a little bit then, like, how does Beam really form? And, share with the audience the journey you've been on with Beam.
I think it's great to point out that, yes, now I think of it as the fun times because we had the maximum amount of freedom and we could do whatever we wanted. And it feels so much different now because the business, is on a track and it's much more prescriptive and it's so structured and all those things are good because it's critical to scale and success in what we're doing now. But at the time, it wouldn't have felt like that at all. It felt desperate. We were clawing at the next client and is this real? And what does my mom think? Because, my grades are starting to collapse. And the whole point was that I was supposed to be in college, not trying to start my own business. And I've never met anyone, by the way, in my life that has ever started a business before age 40. And so what am I doing at 20? It looked like, kind of like playing with a dollhouse, right? It's like fun stuff for kids, but there's like a 0% chance it was going to turn into something real. So it wouldn't have felt, it would have felt very desperate at the time. But that's part of it was a constant adrenaline rush for 2 years, which was the light bulb of thinking we had an idea and trying something and failing. We tried on the side to get multiple concepts off the ground because we wanted our own product. We wanted something that we could take and build and own ourselves. But we tried to get multiple things off the ground that were crash and burn, total crash and burn. And because we didn't know anything about business plans, financial modeling, markets, we were engineers. So most of our experience was like we could build the thing. We had very little concept of, sales, marketing, business development. That was all largely foreign. So I think really the breakthrough came for us in 2012 and multiple forces came together. That first business, one of our clients over about a year or a year and a half worth of time was a dental manufacturing company. It just happened to be located in Louisville, Kentucky. So we were kind of their outsourced R&D department. So they had us always tinkering with little things that, had been kind of internally generated ideas, trying to see if we could turn any of those ideas into something meaningful for their business. And so we started working on a variety of dental ideas and applications. My older sister, got into dental school. And so she's a dental undergrad at the time. So she's learning a bunch of stuff in her classes and, of course, knows that we're working on this business and we're looking for ideas. So she's just kind of lobbing stuff over the wall at me, which is like, this thing kind of stinks to work with. Take a look at that. And so she's throwing all these, dental instruments and, the root canal process is all screwed up. Like, what if you could reinvent how root canals work? It was totally random. And then one of our co-founders, Alex Curry, his mom is a dental hygienist. So he had grown up in the summers, like basically living with her during the day in the office. And so he knew kind of everything about the culture, the environment, and many of the things that go on inside just a dental practice day to day. And so we started thinking seriously about the specifics in the dental industry overlaid with what was happening in plus or minus 2012, which was the Affordable Care Act had been passed recently and it was beginning to roll out. And the big topics for the Affordable Care Act, if you remember, were get more people insurance coverage, create new markets called the insurance exchanges for people to be able to buy insurance that couldn't get it through an employer, or didn't have access to it through Medicare or Medicaid. And then third was kind of like digitize medical records, digitize the process, create more tech-oriented infrastructure for healthcare to run on. Things that are now helping produce multi-billion-dollar businesses across the digital health spectrum. And there's so many exciting things happening in healthcare these days. But a lot of that started with the infrastructure that the Affordable Care Act kind of forced into existence. And we were really interested in what was going on in healthcare. That seemed like a worthy pursuit, was healthcare and tech. There's something in there. And then there were all these dental forces in our lives as well. So we just smashed it all together. And again, that's like another piece of weird tension where I really like building tech and I've got these two friends that really love it as well. And we think healthcare is a big market that's worth it. And my sister's in dental school. So put that in a cauldron, mix it up and see what comes out. And over time, it became obvious to us that as we started looking under the hood of the industry, that dental insurance was a huge influencer into how dentists practiced, what they did, what they didn't do, because it was driven by what they would get reimbursed for. Like the rest of healthcare is the same way. Whatever gets reimbursed is what you do, and it's how you do it as well. And so we saw dental insurance as this archaic, commoditized $75-80 billion market that appeared to be receiving zero innovation attention. And that's essentially what birthed Beam.
Got it. And tell me a little bit about, obviously, your success has been well documented, and your most recent announcement of the latest round, was pretty impressive. You've come a long way. And I remember an early meeting when you were kind of in the very early stages of at least, the Columbus part of Beam. Talk a little bit about the move to Columbus, your experience on this journey, the ups, downs, scary moments, the kind of stuff that maybe people don't know, haven't seen, that you've been through. I mean, from my perspective, there's a tremendous amount of commitment and hustle and grit and, kind of die at your desk, till it happens. And it did happen, but you've been through it to get to this point. Talk a little bit about that.
Beam started with an IoT solution that we imagined selling to the big incumbent insurance carriers. We didn't know anything about insurance at the time and figured it was impossible to build a new insurance business from the ground up. So we didn't even consider that as an option early on. So we built the first connected toothbrush called the Beam Brush. The idea was if we could get insight, telemetry into daily dental hygiene, are you brushing your teeth every day or not? That would be valuable to create more of a personalized relationship and better member experience for the members of insurance businesses. And it could be used in the context of underwriting. It's kind of like a safe driving discount. The telemetry into your driving habits helps illuminate opportunities to deepen the pool of data with which you can decide who is low risk, who's medium risk, who's high risk. And so that was essentially the business. And it worked and it failed. And so it worked in the sense that we successfully built the product. We raised a small seed round. This is still in Kentucky at the time. And we sold a bunch of these connected brushes. But it failed in that our customer sitting on the other side of that transaction was where the data being produced by these brushes needed to go. It needed to go to these insurance businesses. So they needed to be on the other side of the marketplace that we were trying to build as willing participants in consuming that data and then using it, because that would make the market. And that's where we failed. We walked in the front door of all these legacy insurance businesses and gave them the full pitch and just heard crickets on the other end. So we were by 2014 totally out of money. Again, totally desperate. The chip is fully on the shoulder at this point because our one idea that we finally generated that we thought was a thing looks like it's going to crash and burn. And now I've got investor money on the hook as well. And by that point, we had a reputation in Kentucky for being, a good investment. We were reputable. We were real. And so we thought this was going to hurt not just our ability to have the next idea, but we thought it was going to hurt the previous business of services as well, because we would essentially be outed as frauds for having built something that totally didn't work at all. And it was at the Kentucky Derby of 2014 when Drive Capital, it in and of itself a startup at the time in Columbus, had a couple of their partners at the Kentucky Derby, and I got a sneaky backdoor invitation to this party so I could meet them because we were, looking around for the capital that could allow us to expand our ambition as a business. By that point, we knew that we weren't going to be able to convince the legacy dental insurance companies to join us in this innovation journey. We were going to have to build our own insurance business so we could then fully express the idea, which was a digital first dental insurance business. And Drive Capital was at the time, which they should get a ton of credit for, probably the only venture capitalist I know, because I think I pitched every single one of them. The only VC firm that was willing to sit still for a pitch about a new full stack insurance carrier anywhere in the country. And so when we met Drive, we started coming up to Columbus. We ultimately worked out our Series A, which was an investment they made for us to expand from just being the hardware, the IoT, and the data solution into a full stack insurance carrier. That catalyzed us to actually move the company, which was still just really us and our first employees, so there were 4 of us total, moved us to Columbus in summer of 2014 and became the basis of the Beam Dental that we know and operate today. But even in those days, we then had capital, but we still didn't have a business. We didn't have a business model because we needed to build out all this insurance infrastructure before we could really have the business model that would get us to today's Beam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because, obviously you need a partner like Drive who really gets your vision for that and willing to take the risk to get behind it. And, I love the fact that not only were they able to do that, but then you were willing to say, okay, and I'm coming to Columbus. I'm going to build this thing there. From as a longtime resident of Columbus and somebody who's deeply engaged and passionate about the growth of the city, I have said for many years that the future of our city really depends on the next generation of entrepreneurs. Yes, we'll always have state capital and big university, but there needs to be a next generation of entrepreneurs, and it's really companies and success stories like Beam that fuel not just the economics and the job growth, but the culture here too. And thanks to Drive and groups like Beam, we are starting to have an ecosystem, a culture of venture, of technology, of entrepreneurship. And that leads to kind of my belief of, kind of all the cool fun stuff that we want too, right? The arts. And I know that you have a deep passion for art. And I'm also kind of enjoying that, you've got this jockey side, right? And this engineering side, and then this really, very artistic side, and not in the kind of fine, medium, traditional sense, which maybe you do too. I don't know, but the love of art is something that we have in common, and the importance of that in the city. And I know you've been super active with Create Columbus and other places. So talk to me a little bit about kind of your view on Columbus, impact, creativity, the arts, and just share a little bit, generally about kind of where you are engaged and how you see that unfolding go forward.
I love being involved, and Columbus is a great place to get involved. It's very easy to actually get your hands around what's going on in a city the size of Columbus. And one is welcoming to all different people coming at involvement from so many different angles. It's not just a city where you have to be in city council if you want to get anything done, or you have to be a billionaire to get anything done. You can get it done at a lot of different levels, which I really appreciate, and I've always found to be a superpower of Columbus. I'm involved for years. I was involved in the Create Columbus Commission. I got introduced there really early on. Like one of the very first people I met in Columbus when I moved here was Jordan Davis, still one of my best friends today. And it got introduced early to many of the things she was doing in and for the city. Create Columbus was one of them. And so the Create Columbus Commission was like a 4 or 5 year commitment, and have been pulling that thread for a long time. Just a phenomenal group and effort for the city. Now focusing on the GCAC because of that passion for the arts, and involved in the Columbus Museum as well. But probably my board service focus right now is the GCAC. And then we're involved with the ballet as well. My fiance is a former professional ballet dancer, and so we have a lot of passion for all things ballet, where Columbus also has kind of a unique advantage in terms of the quality of the leadership and the organization of Ballet Met. The mission or the vision is bigger than just being involved in the thing. I think you're the exact same way, I think, about thinking about this, which is you're involved in stuff, you're doing things in different pockets, but you're really trying to go at 10,000 feet to look over what's Columbus need to look like in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years from now? And how do we start laying the bricks in that direction now? I totally agree. Entrepreneurs are a driving force of not just the economy, but then what subsequently you can do when there's so much of the dynamicism that gets introduced into a place because of the efforts of entrepreneurs. And I think that's really exciting. I view Columbus as still a relatively blank canvas. It's like weird because it's a 2 million person metro area, and it's kind of like just getting started. There's still plenty of, parking lots that need to be turned into big, bold pieces of architecture. There are still plenty of places where public art needs to be installed in the city. There are plenty of districts that need to be built out. There are plenty of neighborhoods that deserve more investment. There's plenty of digital infrastructure that still needs to be introduced into the city. And, I view this at the education level, at the real estate development level. I view this as certainly at the art level and in the social fabric. And I think it's a really exciting time in Columbus because it feels like you and I and 3 other people could get together tomorrow, have an idea, fund an idea, and then execute an idea in any of those domains I mentioned and more, and actually get it done. Not because we're necessarily the most special people put on earth, but because Columbus is in the sweet spot of having the ability to make things happen without there being so much bureaucracy and infrastructure and regulatory, et cetera, to be able to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's more true today than I've experienced in the past. Maybe there was another time where this was also still true, but where I get excited is having people like you who do have the vision and also have the understanding that you can make things happen. And yes, there's a openness here to do that is relatively easy compared to other cities. I believe, in a sense of collaboration that allows things to happen, much easier. But, I kind of come back to these threads along your life where you maybe even take it for granted a little bit. I think, most people that have this skill, and I would put myself in that category. It comes so naturally that we don't necessarily realize, kind of how we make things happen. It's just kind of what we do. And you've done that over and over again, whether it be, left-handed catcher, linebacker, the pivots, in the first business, right? Beam, like, you have a gift. You make things happen, and you are expanding that outside of your work and into the community as you start to do this work. And great things will happen there too. And so that's exciting, for me to watch and to have others to do these kinds of fun and impactful, initiatives with.
It is really fun to watch peers, friends, people people you don't know, but that have some sort of overlap with you, like other folks in Columbus is a great example. It's fun to be able to just see and watch people who do things get things done at any level. And it's again, I think a really fun time in the city. My area of passion is around the arts. So I'm going to continue to try to make things happen in that arena specifically, but am simultaneously super appreciative of folks that are also doers and imaginers and visionaries that are making things happen in domains that I'm personally less interested in, but know that we also need to be able to create the city of the future for Columbus.
Yeah. And one last question for you. I'm observing your willingness and kind of your courage. And I don't know if that's the right word for you, but that's the way it looks to me, to continue to lean into the what's possible and the ability to create in ways that maybe are unique and not kind of the traditional way things have been done, which I have found, living in Columbus most of my life. I think Columbus is a very different city today than it was, decades ago. That even still, there is a bit of a sense of kind of a public societal fabric expectation of how things are done. And those things that are really outside the box can oftentimes come with a lot of resistance. And so, whether it be, get rid of the car and no couch or anything else that you're doing, talk to me just a little bit about how you have gotten comfortable or what your experience has been in doing things differently despite maybe that societal fabric that does still exist.
It is scary in a sense because everybody wants to be included. You want to be on the inside of the joke, not the butt of the joke. And in places that are more conservative and traditional, there's an expectation, right? Business people wear suits, right? And business people wear suits and they talk a certain way and they attend these events and they all hang out and do this and they're executing a playbook that already exists. Mm-hmm. The creativity, the personality traits that I think naturally that I've had naturally I've always wanted to accomplish what that traditional person accomplishes, but differently. So I've always looked for how can I be just 10 degrees of the playbook, but I can still get to the end point. Again, putting a chip on the shoulder to just look for what's my angle to this thing. And again, it's not difference for difference sake. I want to get there. I want to get there differently and hopefully be even more successful or inspire other people or show folks that there is a different way to do it. And now I just do it, so I think it's fun also to be a little bit provocative, especially in a city or in an environment that is a bit more traditional. I've been hawking the taco bus idea for years now. Have you heard it? Have I told you this one before?
No, you haven't.
So CODA is missing the opportunity of a lifetime. The Central Ohio Transit Authority should rename itself the Transit Authority of Central Ohio Taco. Uh-huh. And we should wrap all of our buses in Columbus to look like burritos, chalupas, hard shell, soft shell tacos, whatever your thing is. And we should celebrate Taco Tuesdays every Tuesday. And it would be the weirdest, quirkiest thing that the city of Columbus has probably ever done. And it's a half serious proposal, which I am trying to get traction on, by the way. But it's really meant to force people who would otherwise be taking someone like me, a local business leader, very seriously on the things like, Fro, tell me 3 ideas to make Columbus better. And they're expecting to hear things like, high speed access to the thing, or like, let's make our schools better, or let's repave the roads, or whatever those initiatives you would expect to come out of my mouth as a business leader. But the first thing I'm going to flop on the table is the taco bus, because it's a way to brand the city and it's art, right? That would be some public art rolling with our buses. And it would also just be a totally divorced from the norm idea that Columbus and many other places need to become more comfortable consuming and understanding as worthy of consideration, not the proposal itself, but the idea that you can take something that's naturally joyous, quirky, and a little bit left of center and go, oh, that actually is kind of an interesting idea. Why haven't we thought of that before? Why aren't we considering things like this? And maybe it never turns into the literal taco bus, but maybe this other public art initiative ends up happening because there were a bunch of people that were forced to the table by the provocative idea of the taco bus. I think that's really fun to do.
Well, that's great. I love the example. And I know you're maybe more than half serious. And why I love it, why I love that you brought this up is because it is the kind of stuff that's like, people can say, well, let's think outside the box. Let's be creative and find our way to be different. But they don't really mean it. They mean like just on the edge of the box at best, right? Yep. And so they don't really get like something that quirky, something that weird. Actually, and this is the point I've been trying to make locally as it pertains to architecture, design, public art, placemaking, that I believe these kinds of Instagram moments, maybe now NFTs, right? Like this is actually economic development.
Yeah.
And if you imagine the media, imagine the media that would come from something like that. I mean, even if they just did it for a day or took 3 buses, right? Or had it on Tuesday, whatever it might be, like it would be a international story, right?
It would be.
And what would that do for, Columbus is creative. Columbus is artistic. Columbus is what else? Entrepreneurial. This is a place where millennials are thriving, where weird ideas can become integrated into public-private partnerships. I mean, it's actually exactly the kind of thing that we need to be doing. Now, it's more than 10% outside the box, which I do want to kind of just comment on because I think, what you've done is exactly the path that I recommend, which is take a baby step. Don't jump without a parachute. Iterate. You don't have to go all the way to the end right at the beginning, right? But now that you've landed where you've landed, you do have the confidence and the kind of, bandwidth, resources, reputation to take some big ass jumps in that world. And it's because you did the 10% all the way there to now you can, throw anything out that you want.
It's a muscle like any others, right? I'm a very secure person today because I've always been willing to be a little bit weird and just live in it, right? If I was a bad left-handed catcher, I might have lost the will to continue to be a catcher or even play baseball at all. So I fought and competed to become better than all the right-handed catchers, or at least as good as every single one of them I ever came up against. So that way I could hang. And if somebody ever tried to make fun of the fact that I was a left-handed catcher, I was like, look, beat me. Then prove you're better. And so today I want to compete in the marketplace of ideas. And if you can come up with, as I'm sure you can, an idea 10x better than the taco bus, bring it on. Like let's come up with the best ideas possible so that Columbus succeeds as a city. And if this idea is a great one, then it should be pursued with the same vigor as any other great idea that comes on the table. And that's what makes it so fun is that once you have the security to know that you belong at the table in the first place, you can now really start opening up not what you think they want to hear, but what you actually think.
Yeah, it's great. Fro, thanks for taking the time. It's been a pleasure to chat with you and to hear your story and to get inside to your thinking. And any kind of final thoughts you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Just that I think our opening chat was about entourage. Our closing chat was about taco buses. And so I'm not even sure if anybody's going to listen to anything in between, but we'll see. It was fun nonetheless.
Yeah, good. Well, fun for me too. And I hope people do listen. There's a lot of really great wisdom in there. And congrats on all your success and keep it going.
Thanks, man. You too. Super fun.